Hi, this video will discuss how to multiply radicals. So before we get started on doing my examples here on the left, let's talk about when we multiply radicals, what happens. If we are taking the same root, in other words, we have the same index, here I have a square root, here I have a square root of 2 times square root of 3. I can take the radical, so I'm going to end up with the square root, but then I can do the operation underneath the radical. So 2 times 3 is 6. Okay, that's only if I'm taking the same root or have the same index. If I multiply a radical by itself, so if I had root 3 times square root 3, the radical essentially goes away and I'm just left with what's underneath it. So that's going to be 3. Why is that? Well, if you did it the long way, like we did the first example, we'd have the square root of 9, and we know that the square root of 9 is just 3. So in other words, if we multiply a radical by itself, the radical goes away and I'm just left with what's underneath the radical. In this case, it was 3. If we multiply radicals where there's numbers out front, we want to multiply them first and then multiply our radicals. So to multiply this, I have to say 2 times 3 is 6, okay? And then I do my radicals. Square root 3 times square root 5 would give me the square root of 15. For the same reason as the first example I gave you. I'm taking both square roots, so I'm going to end up with a square root, and 3 times 5 is 15. The watch out here is you have to be taking the same root, okay? So I'm taking square roots in all these examples, all right? The other key is that when you multiply a radical by itself, the radical just disappears. So with that in mind, let's do some examples. Here I have a radical out front, and I'm just going to distribute it across my parentheses. All right, just doing distribution. Based on my rules before, I have square root of 3 times 2 square root of 5. First, I'm going to look at the numbers. Well, this essentially has a 1 out front. 1 times 2 is going to give me 2. Okay, and then I look at my radicals. Square root of 3 times square root of 5, they're both square roots, so I'm going to end up with a square root, and then 3 times 5 is 15. But I'm not done. I have to distribute this all the way across. So for the next thing, I'm going to have the square root of 3 times minus the square root of 3. First thing I want to notice is that a positive times a negative is going to yield a negative. Okay, and secondly, I have square root of 3 times square root of 3. So that second rule holds. The square root is just going to go away, and I'm going to be left with a negative 3. Now I cannot further simplify this answer, so this is my answer, 2 square root 15 minus 3. If we're given two terms, we have to fold this out. All right, first, 3 times 3 is 9. Okay, no radicals there. Then we're going to go outer. 3 times minus 2 square root 7. So multiply the numbers part. 3 times minus 2 is going to give me a minus 6. And then multiply the radical part. Well, there's no radical here, so I'm just going to end up with square root 7. Next, I'm going to go inner. 2 square root 7 times 3. Multiply my numbers part. 2 times 3 is a positive 6. And then my radical part. Well, I just have a square root 7, so I'm going to end up with that. All right, and then my last terms. 2 times minus 2 is going to give me a minus 4. Multiply my number parts, so I did 2 and a minus 2. And then my radicals. Square root 7 times square root 7. Up, my radical's going to go away, and I'm going to be left with just a 7. Notice what happens to my middle terms. I have minus 6 square root 7 and positive 6 square root 7. So these are going to cancel out. And I'm left with 9 minus, 9 minus 4 times 7, which is a negative 28. So 9 minus 28 is going to give me a negative 17. So that is my answer. So notice on this one, when I multiplied out the radical, I got rid of them, and I ended up with just a nice number, 17. In this last example, again, we're going to FOIL, but it's a slightly different format. So I have 2 root 3 times 3 root 3. That's going to be my first terms. So again, I want to multiply the two numbers. 2 times 3 is 6. And then I have square root 3 times square root 3. So my square roots are going to go away, and I'm just going to be left with a 3. Then I'm going to do the outer terms. This is a 7, believe it or not. So I have 2 square root 3 times negative 7. I'm going to multiply my numbers. 2 and negative 7 give me minus 14. And then I only have the square root 3, so that is going to be square root 3. The two inner terms, 5 times 3 square root 3. 5 times 3 gives me a positive 15, and then I have my square root 3. And then I'm going to do the last terms, which is 5 times the negative 7 is going to be negative 35. Okay, so this is going to become 18. I can combine these two middle terms. I've got a minus 14 square root 3 and a positive 15 square root 3. So this is just going to be a 1 square root 3, or in other words, the square root of 3, and then minus 35. So I can combine minus 35 and a positive 18, and I get negative 17 plus the square root of 3. And now I cannot combine these two, because in order to combine them, this would also have to have a square root of 3. So this is my answer, minus 17 plus the square root of 3.